You're tuning into the deep dive because you're the kind of person who wants to understand the world a little better, maybe a little faster, and hopefully have a few aha moments without feeling totally swamped.
Right.
Today, we're plunging into the fascinating world of ancient grains. We're going to zero in on millets and quinoa, but also uncover some less common, really interesting processing methods. Stuff like the bucci method and these traditional bowl-driven ganuga
Yeah,
oils.
things you don't hear about every day.
Exactly. So if you've ever thought about how your food choices impact your health, maybe the planet too, and if you're kind of drawn to the wisdom of, older traditions, this deep dive is definitely for you.
And we're pulling insights from a couple of key sources today. Embracing wholesome living with Siradanya, the Bucci method, and Sattvic food, and also millets versus quinoa, why millets are the ancient superfood for modern wellness.
Okay.
So our mission really is to cut through some of the hype and really grasp the nutritional power of these grains, why the processing matters so much, and sort of the philosophy behind it all.
Okay. Sounds great. Let's jump straight into millets then. Our sources talk about something called siradanya. Right away, that sounds, well, a bit special. They call them positive millets. What's the story there?
Exactly. Ceratania aren't just, any greens. They're specific ancient varieties with a really deep history, especially in Ayurveda.
Ayurveda.
And this is important. In that tradition, they're seen as more than just food for energy. They're believed to have properties that contribute to overall well-being, like medicine almost.
Ah, so positive hints at something more than just nutrition.
Precisely. It suggests a broader spectrum of benefits going beyond just basic carbs and protein.
Fascinating. So which specific grains are we talking about when we say siratanya?
Well, the main ones highlighted are foxtail millet, little millet, kodo millet, barnyard millet, and brown top millet.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that each one has its own unique nutritional profile, even slightly different flavors. And, it's clear they're making a real comeback.
A comeback.
Yeah, as a really valuable food for people focused on health, maybe those with dietary restrictions like gluten intolerance, that sort of thing.
It's interesting because, let's be honest, for a while now, quinoa has been the star, hasn't it? The go-to healthy grain.
Oh, absolutely. Quinoa's been huge globally.
But our sources seem to be drawing a pretty clear contrast here with millets.
They really do. While quinoa has gained massive popularity, the sources emphasize that millets, especially these Siradanya types, have a much, much longer history, particularly in India.
Vapor roots, you mean?
Exactly. They're deeply woven into Ayurvedic practices, the agricultural heritage, traditional cooking. It's a whole cultural context.
Yeah.
The texts even suggest millets have a kind of grounding energy and are considered sattvic.
Grounding energy, sattvic. Okay, we'll need to unpack sattvic later. Sounds intriguing. But let's talk brass tacks for a moment. Nutritionally, how do these Siratanya millets actually compare to quinoa? What are the real advantages?
Right. Well, according to the millets versus quinoa source, Siradanya millets, specifically mentioning foxtail, little, and kodo millet, tend to come out ahead in several key areas compared to quinoa.
Like what?
We're talking significantly higher levels of fiber, which is, crucial for digestion, blood sugar balance, really important stuff.
Okay, fiber's a big one.
Definitely. They also generally offer more iron think energy levels, more magnesium, which is involved in, hundreds of bodily processes, and often a better profile of essential B vitamins, too. Vital for nerves, metabolism.
So these aren't just tiny differences then?
No, the sources suggest they can have a noticeable impact, especially for managing things like diabetes, digestive issues, or other metabolic concerns.
That's quite compelling.
Yeah.
Now, one of the sources mentioned something interesting, that when these millets are processed using this bucci method, they might be gentler on the stomach than quinoa. Why is that?
Yes, that's a really key point. Quinoa naturally contains compounds called saponins.
Spinines.
Yeah, they're sort of soapy compounds on the outside of the grain. For some people, especially those with sensitive guts, they can be a bit irritating. That's actually why you're always told to rinse quinoa really well before cooking.
Right, I was wondering about that rinsing step.
Exactly. But millets processed using the bucci method, they don't really have that issue. They're described as naturally gentle, and the sources even suggest they might support gut repair. The processing here is crucial.
How so?
Because the Bucci method is designed to be minimal, preserving the grain's natural state without introducing anything harsh or needing to remove potentially irritating compounds like saponins.
So it's not just the grain itself, but how it's prepared before it even gets to us.
Absolutely. And, the benefits go beyond just our own digestion. The sources make a strong point about the local and sustainable aspects of millet farming.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, millets are often incredibly resilient. They can thrive in rain-fed conditions, meaning less reliance on irrigation. They generally need fewer synthetic inputs, fertilizers, pesticides compared to other major crops.
Which is better for the environment, obviously.
For sure. And importantly, cultivating them often supports local agricultural communities. One source mentions Organic Sphere working directly with farmer cooperatives, which is a great model.
That's a huge point, isn't it? Because sometimes those globally popular superfoods have a pretty big environmental footprint getting them to us. How does quinoa compare there?
Well, the Millets versus Quinoa article does point out that a lot of the quinoa we consume is imported, often from South America, and it has specific altitude requirements for growing well.
So more food miles,
Hmm.
potentially a larger carbon footprint.
Potentially, yeah, compared to millets that might be grown much closer to where they're consumed, especially in places like India.
So choosing millets could actually be a more environmentally sound choice in many situations.
Okay, what about cooking with them? Are they tricky? Sometimes these super healthy grains can be a bit, well, boring or limited.
Not according to these sources, they really emphasize the versatility of millets. You can use them in a massive range of dishes. Oh, traditional Indian staples like dosas, pongal, khichdi, different kinds of flatbreads or rotis. But they can also be swapped into modern recipes, even used in desserts.
Desserts. Okay, that's surprising.
Yeah. Plus, it's worth noting some of these ancient grains, including millets from suppliers like Organic Sphere, are also certified USDA organic and non-GMO. So that adds another layer of assurance for people who care about that.
Good to know. Okay, so millets are sounding pretty impressive, nutritionally, environmentally, culturally. Now let's properly dig into this Bucci method we keep mentioning. It feels like a really critical piece of the puzzle. It absolutely is. The Bucci method is presented as a traditional technique for processing millets, and its core principle is basically preserving the grain's natural integrity and purity.
Okay, integrity and purity. How does that differ from, say, regular industrial processing?
Well, the big contrast is that large-scale industrial processing, while very efficient, can sometimes involve processes like heavy polishing or high heat that can strip away the outer layers of the grain.
And that's where a lot of the good stuff is, right? The fiber, the minerals.
Exactly. Industrial methods might inadvertently remove vital nutrients in the quest for uniformity or longer shelf life. The Bucci method aims to avoid that entirely.
So what does it involve then? What makes it different?
The sources highlight a few key things. First, and maybe most importantly, it involves minimal mechanical intervention. It's about being gentle.
Gentle processing. How do they achieve that?
Instead of extensive refining or polishing, they use a softer approach. One source even mentions using specialized mixers, pulse mode mixers, with blades that are intentionally less sharp, sort of shunted, specifically to ensure the grains remain 100% unpolished.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah, it shows a real commitment to keeping the bran and germ intact. This careful handling is what helps retain that crucial fiber content and other nutrients close to the surface.
That gentle approach sounds key. What else defines the Bucci method?
Secondly, there's a really strong focus on being eco-conscious. The method is described as being environmentally sound and also supportive of the local communities involved in the processing.
Okay, so sustainability is built in.
Seems so. And finally, rigorous quality control. They mention multiple checks throughout the process to absolutely guarantee that the grains stay unpolished and remain in their natural state.
And all this effort in processing really makes a difference in the final product we eat.
Absolutely. The excerpt from Embracing Wholesome Living directly addresses this. It claims that while typical conventional processing can lead to quite significant fiber loss, the Bucci method is specifically designed to keep that loss negligible. They're aiming for near complete retention of the grain's natural goodness.
That's impressive.
It is, and apparently, Organic Sphere feels so strongly about this method that they actually offer to help others set up their own Bucci processing facilities.
Really, that speaks volumes about their commitment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They're not just guarding a secret method.
Exactly. Now, You mentioned earlier the sources also briefly touched on bowl-driven ganuga oils in the context of local sourcing. What's that about?
Ah, yes, the ganuga oils.
The mention of bowl-driven ganuga, sometimes called gani for extracting oil, fits perfectly with this whole philosophy of traditional chemical-free practices.
How so?
It's presented as another way to ensure true farm-to-plate nutrition. Just like the Bucci method is gentle on the grains, this traditional way of extracting oil uses slow, low-temperature pressure, often powered by bulls walking in a circle.
Bull powered. Wow.
Yeah, it avoids the high heat and chemical solvents often used in modern oil extraction. This preserves the oil's natural nutrients, antioxidants, and flavors much better.
So it's the same principle, maintaining natural integrity, avoiding harsh processing.
Precisely. It just reinforces this idea that these ancient grains are often part of a larger ecosystem of traditional, wholesome food practices, covering oils as well as grains.
It all seems to connect back to preserving the natural state of the food.
Exactly right. And this resonates very strongly with another concept discussed in our sources, sattvic food.
Ah, yes, Sativic. You mentioned that earlier in relation to millets having grounding energy. Can you give us the rundown on what Sattvic food actually means?
Sure, sattvic food is a dietary approach rooted in Ayurvedic principles. At its core, it's about purity, harmony, and balance for both the body and the mind.
Purity and balance. Okay.
It emphasizes foods that are considered rich in prana, which you can think of as life force or vital energy.
Quinoa life force. What kinds of foods fit that description?
Generally, we're talking about fresh, whole, naturally grown, plant-based foods. Think fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains like our millets, nuts, seeds, and dairy from well-cared-for animals, if included.
So mostly unprocessed natural foods.
Pretty much. The key characteristics are that sattvic foods are typically light, easy to digest, and are believed to promote a sense of calm, clarity, and peacefulness in the mind, not heavy or stimulating.
So it's not just about physical nutrition, it's about the food's effect on our mental state, even our spiritual well-being.
That's the holistic view, yes. And interestingly, the sources also connect sattvic eating to broader concepts like environmental sustainability and ethical agriculture. It's about the whole picture, how the food affects us and how its production affects the world.
It really sounds like these three things we've discussed, the Sirotanya millets, the Bucci method processing, and the Sattvic food principles fit together incredibly well.
They absolutely do. The sources really emphasize this synergy. They argue that these elements combine to create a truly holistic approach to well-being. Well, Bucci processed Sirotanya millets are presented as being perfectly aligned with a sattvic diet. Why? Because they are whole, they're minimally processed using gentle methods, and they therefore retain their natural vitality, their prana, and their nutrients.
Ah, I see. The processing supports the inherent Sattvic quality of the grain.
Exactly. It's a beautiful alignment where how the processing respects the inherent nature of the food, and it all fits within this larger philosophy of pure, balanced, healthy living.
And making these kinds of conscious food choices, it has impacts beyond just our own plate, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. The sources make a strong case that by choosing Sirotanya millets processed with the Bucci method, consumers are doing more than just eating healthy.
What else?
They're directly supporting sustainable farming practices because these grains often require fewer resources. They're potentially supporting more ethical employment within the communities that grow and process them traditionally, and ultimately, they're contributing to a healthier environment.
The source has mentioned a ripple effect, right?
Yes, exactly. The idea is that these conscious consumer decisions send a signal. They encourage more eco-friendly agriculture, they foster greater awareness about where food comes from, how it's made. It creates positive momentum.
That's a powerful thought. Now, amidst all this talk of health, sustainability, and ethics, what about just, well, enjoying the food? Do these things actually taste good?
That's a fair question, and the sources are clear on this.
Yes.
They assure us that Sirotanya millets and sapit foods aren't about deprivation. They offer rich, authentic, natural flavors.
So it's not just health food that you have to endure.
Not at all. It's suggested that using traditional sattvic recipes, which are often simple but flavorful, actually enhances the inherent grounding and nourishing qualities of these grains. It's framed as a culinary experience that connects you back to the earth's natural goodness, its generosity, and why preserving that purity matters.
Okay, so taste isn't sacrifice. That's good to hear. Right, let's try and pull this all together then. What are the main things we should really take away from this deep dive into millets, the Bucci method, and Sattvic principles?
I think there are a few key takeaways. First, The significant nutritional punch that millets, especially these Sirutanya varieties, can offer, often surpassing more globally known grains like quinoa in specific nutrients like fiber, iron, magnesium.
Right. The nutritional advantage.
Second, the critical importance of processing. The Bucci method stands out as a traditional, gentle technique focused squarely on preserving the grain's natural integrity and nutrient profile, which is a real contrast to potentially stripping industrial methods.
The purity of processing. Got it.
And finally, there's the overarching holistic philosophy of sattvic food, which ties it all together, emphasizing whole, unprocessed foods, mindful eating, and the connection between our diet, our well-being, and the planet's health.
It really does paint a picture of reconnecting with maybe more traditional, more wholesome ways of eating, doesn't it? Choosing these foods feels less like just grabbing something off the shelf and more like a conscious decision.
Exactly. A decision that values personal health, yes, but also environmental sustainability and ethical practices. It's presented as a move away from just chasing the latest food trends
Towards something deeper.
towards perhaps a deeper understanding of our food, where it comes from, how it affects us, how it impacts the world around us.
It definitely makes you pause and think about your own choices. How could maybe incorporating some of these ancient grains or seeking out foods processed with more care shift your own approach to eating and well-being?
Yeah.
Maybe it is time for some of us to look beyond the fleeting fads and explore the kind of enduring wisdom found in these time-tested traditions. It's certainly food for thought, no pun intended, for anyone aiming for a more conscious, healthier way of life.
Well said.
We definitely encourage you, our listener, to explore, further dive into the world of ancient grains. Look into traditional food processing if you can, and maybe learn more about these holistic dietary principles. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.